Hey guys, Kyle the Death Knight of Anime here, bringing you my review for Eden Zero Chapter 95. To start, one of the big reveals of this chapter is that we learn the horrific truth about the life support machine that preserves Drakken Joe's youth, which is that it drains the life force from the entire populace of Belial Gore. And this actually gives greater context to when he said this actually gives greater context to something that Drakken Joe said a couple chapters back when he was talking about how he's running out of time. Like, if just based off what he said, what he's basically saying there is I think the people living on Belial Gore probably don't have enough life force in order to last to only last like at least one more to at least, like, at best, last one more collective drain. So at this point, it really is. It sets up that this really is kind of a do or die situation for Drakken Joe, or just reinforces it anyway. It all, in many respects, too, as weird as it sounds, it also gives a lot more understanding to Drakken Joe's methods of how he entraps people into working on Belial Gore, because because with the whole idea of this machine sapping the life force from basically other people, it makes even like it really gives purpose to something that didn't necessarily need to be expanded on, but it is interesting to see it expanded on as well, because it actually gives another layer to why Drakken Joe has basically entrapped people into working on Belial Gore to begin with. Like, it obviously he's a criminal, so he's obviously gonna make these kind of deals either way. But he's obviously like a crime boss and he's obviously a crime boss and whatnot, so he's gonna make deals like this either way. But it adds that second layer in the sense where he needs people on Belial Gore and he needs as many people gathered together for the machine to even work. Like, they are pretty much livestock in order to feed the machine, pretty much. And in terms of how this ties back to Clean's whole thing about her fear of being absorbed, that's more likely like alluding to the fact that, yeah, if Drakken Joe ends up using the machine one more time, she's probably gonna end up being one of the people who dies if it was used again. So yeah, it adds a whole, again, it adds this whole other extra layer to basically this whole situation, and why, and especially why Drakken Joe specifically has been gathering people. Like, again, he's obviously a crime boss, so he's gonna gather people in order to fuel his like his businesses and whatnot. But it's like they also serve the second purpose of just giving him youth again. So yeah, the thing is, if he uses that machine one more time, like I said, I think I don't know if everyone on Belial Gore would die, but at least a large chunk of them would probably die, to the point where he wouldn't be able to use it again, which again reinforces why he's so desperate in order to get Cat Leaper. Like, he needs, like, he is running out of options. He needs Cat Leaper again. Now, of course, one thing to talk about in all this is that Gene, or rather Chris Ruthford, as we learn his real name to be, was more or less convinced to help our heroes in this chapter. And one thing I really like about his turn is that it wasn't just Ivory that convinced him. It was a collective effort where Amira laid out the harsh reality and facts about what was happening on Belial Gore this whole time, which more or less weakened his resolve, allowing Ivory to basically come in with the deal breaker and the promise that Ivory can save Clean if he helps him out. And it's it's one of those things where it's a very simple. Just the way that this whole negotiation played out. It's it's a very simple but very effective use of situational negotiation tactics. That's the best way I can call them. Negotiation tactics. Like this what 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 Amira and Ivory did is basically what you'd is basically just in some ways your standard negotiation tactic, but it works so well in how it's presented that when Chris slash Jean ends up ends up agreeing, it doesn't feel forced. It just feels natural. It isn't. That's the one thing I think I was worried about is whether or not Jean's pretty much turned to help our heroes would feel. And no, just the way Mashima presented everything, it just felt so naturally pretty much woven in that it really didn't need much, honestly. So yeah, I really got to appreciate for basically how the confrontation, for how like the for how it go for how this all went down. It was really well handled, honestly. Um, of course, and and also with pretty much knowing that Hermit is hacking the machine and reversing the process of how reversing the whole process of people's life force being sucked into to grant in order to grant Drakken Joe his youth. It's definitely and with her reversing it to where the next time Drakken Joe uses it, it's actually going to give life force back to the people. It's actually a very nice workaround to bringing the nearly OP monster that has been Drakken Joe up to this point down on a more even playing field, so to speak. Because, I mean, don't get me wrong. As of right now, he basically is an extremely strong adversary that is kind of pushing Shiki definitely to his limits a little bit. But if they can play this right, then Drakken Joe can be defeated. In fact, between this and what happened by the end of the chapter with Weisz showing up, I think I have an idea of how this might play out, which is that Joe will get pushed so far into we'll get pushed into a corner, pretty much so far into a corner of desperation during this fight, and even pretty much possibly even fail to capture Rebecca at several points as well, that at some point, if they fight him long enough, Joe will be forced to retreat back into the machine. But by the time he does, that's when the whole thing is gonna go reversal on him, and he'll actually be giving life force back to the people. And it's one of those things where it's gonna, I think it might turn into a really dark situation, because if you think of because by the effect of Drakken giving life force back to the people, he's gonna drain all his. I think Drakken Joe is gonna end up almost like killing himself practically by doing this, and if that is how it plays out, it's gonna be like a very poetic and ironic death, because as we know, Drakken Joe, he's an alchemist and considers himself an alchemist. He's all about that equivalent exchange stuff. So yeah, it's perfect trade off in that sense as well. So yeah, and this isn't me, and that's not even, and me saying all this, that's not even counting Gene Chris in this equation, which, yeah, at this point, it's, again, almost a guarantee he's definitely going to throw his hand in the ring again. But this time with Weisz and Shiki, and him, it's definitely gonna be a little harder for Joe for sure. Like, and I'm not saying it's gonna be easier either, but yeah, I definitely feel that with these three possibly facing down Drakken Joe now, it's the pot like I think the possibilities of what I just laid out is gonna happen. I think. Um, that's not saying it's gonna be easier either though. And with Weisz confronting Joe now, I feel this does. I feel this definitely does feel like the moment where he's gonna lose his arm just like he did in the previous world. Like it does kind of feel like it's going down that route that Weisz is gonna lose his arm for sure. I think in this fight in some way. Um, Now, with that said, let's talk about the personal vendetta that Weisz now seems to have against Drakken Joe for supposedly using his life support machine to kill someone he cared about. And yeah, it's hard to. It's again, since we're just learning about this, it's hard to say who exactly this person is. But it's hard to say who this person is. I have maybe a few ideas. I can't say with certainty though. But one thing I am certain about is that there is a potential now to dive more into Weisz's history through a backstory of like don't get me wrong. Basically, I guess in itself you could say that the whole Norma arc in itself was in its way like a bit of self-contained like like backstory and story form, like learning what like seeing who Weisz was and whatnot. But now we're gonna dive more into that history. So and and again that also means we're probably gonna get a backstory of what happened and who this person is that Weisz cared about. On the other hand, though, I will admit, with this being set up among all the other things going on, this is really turning into one of the longest arcs in the series run so far. And don't get me wrong, I kind of like it for that, but at the same time, I do hope whatever the story is with this person that Weisz cared about, that the backstory itself won't be too long, and that like and I'm hoping at least like pretty much 4 or 5 chapters at most. But but yeah, I'm hoping that we kind of speed along from here because it is looking like we're kind of entering the climax of this arc here. So hopefully the backstory, if we get one, isn't going to be too long. But yeah, guys. That being said, with that said, that's my review. If you enjoyed the video, like, comment, subscribe. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Lister Control. That Night of Anime, signing off. Later, guys.